There is a common assumption in fashion that looking expensive requires expensive clothing. That belief is so deeply embedded that most people never question it. They assume that luxury is something you buy, that style is something you inherit through price tags, that if something looks refined, it must have cost more. But when you start observing people who consistently look polished, elegant, and visually expensive, you notice something very different. Their clothing is not always expensive. Sometimes it is, but often it is not. And yet the perception remains the same: refined, intentional, structured, put together. And that raises an important question. If price is not the determining factor, what is? Because expensive-looking style is not actually about money, it is about visual language, a system of cues the brain interprets as quality, order, and intention. And once you understand that system, you realize something important. Looking expensive is not about what you wear, it is about how what you wear is constructed, maintained, and presented. So to understand how to dress expensive on a budget, we need to stop thinking in terms of shopping and start thinking in terms of perception engineering, because clothing is not just fabric, it is information, and the human brain reads that information instantly, before you even speak, before you even move. So let's break down how that perception is formed. The first and most important element is fit. Fit is the foundation of everything, because no matter how expensive or inexpensive a garment is, if it does not fit correctly, the perception immediately drops. The brain is extremely sensitive to proportion. When clothing aligns with body structure, it creates visual harmony. When it does not, it creates tension. And tension reads as low quality, not because the clothing is bad, but because the visual system is disrupted. So the first principle of looking expensive is simple. Fit always overrides brand, always. A perfectly fitted, affordable shirt will always look better than an expensive shirt that fits poorly, and this is where tailoring becomes one of the most powerful tools in budget styling. Because tailoring is not about luxury, it is about alignment, adjusting hems, refining sleeves, tapering waistlines, correcting proportions. These small modifications bring clothing closer to the body's natural structure, and when structure aligns with the body, the entire silhouette improves. Now, once fit is established, the next layer is fabric perception. Because even without touching the fabric, the brain evaluates it visually, and certain visual cues are associated with quality, smoothness, weight, structure, consistency. Cheap-looking fabrics often appear overly thin, overly shiny, or visually unstable, while more refined-looking fabrics tend to hold shape and absorb light more evenly. This does not require expensive materials, it requires awareness of visual texture. For example, matte finishes often look more expensive than high gloss. Structured cotton often looks more premium than overly soft, thin fabric. Even simple knitwear can look elevated if it maintains shape properly. So the goal is not luxury materials, it is visual stability. Now we move into color, which is one of the most underestimated elements in style perception. Color communicates emotion before detail is even processed. And in fashion psychology, color harmony is directly linked to perceived sophistication. Overly chaotic color combinations create visual noise, and noise reduces perceived quality. That is why expensive-looking outfits often rely on controlled palettes. Neutrals, earth tones, monochrome combinations, soft contrasts, black, white, beige, navy, gray. Not because color is limited, but because simplicity creates clarity, and clarity reads as intentional. Now, intentionality is the core theme behind everything that looks expensive, because the brain associates intentional choices with higher value, even when the actual cost is low. So when colors are coordinated properly, the outfit feels deliberate, and deliberation signals refinement. Now, let's move into structure. Structure is what transforms clothing from casual to elevated. Structure refers to how garments hold shape on the body: a structured blazer, a clean-cut shirt, well-shaped trousers. These items create visual geometry, and geometry creates order, and order is associated with sophistication. Even when clothing is simple, the structure elevates perception instantly. Now compare that to unstructured clothing. Loose, undefined, shapeless garments. These can feel comfortable, but they often reduce perceived refinement because they lack visual control, and control is one of the strongest signals of expensive appearance. Now let's talk about minimalism. Minimalism in fashion does not mean less clothing, it means less visual interference. Removing unnecessary elements, avoiding excessive patterns, avoiding cluttered designs, avoiding competing visual distractions. Because when the eye is overloaded, it cannot register elegance, but when the visual field is clean, it interprets refinement more easily. This is why many high-end styles appear simple at first glance, because simplicity allows structure to be seen clearly. Now let's shift into wardrobe strategy. Because dressing expensive on a budget is not about buying random pieces, it is about building a system, a functional wardrobe ecosystem. Instead of focusing on quantity and focus on compatibility, pieces that work together, neutral tops that pair with multiple bottoms, outerwear that elevates multiple outfits, shoes that anchor different looks. This creates repetition efficiency, where fewer items generate more outfit combinations, and repetition becomes unnoticeable because everything aligns visually. Now let's talk about footwear, one of the strongest perception anchors in fashion. Shoes carry disproportionate visual weight. People may not consciously analyze them, but they influence impression immediately. Clean shoes signal care, structured shoes signal intention. Well-maintained shoes signal consistency. Even budget outfits rise in perceived value when paired with clean, simple footwear because shoes complete the visual story. Now let's move into grooming and maintenance, because clothing alone does not create a polished look. Maintenance does. Wrinkled clothing reduces perceived value instantly. Even expensive garments lose impact when poorly maintained. While properly ironed, clean, well-kept budget clothing can appear significantly more refined. This is because the brain interprets maintenance as effort, and effort is associated with value. So presentation matters just as much as selection. Now let's talk about layering. Layering adds depth to outfits, but only when done with control. Too many layers create clutter, too little creates flatness. But intentional layering creates dimension. A clean base layer with a structured outer layer, a neutral foundation with subtle contrast. This adds visual hierarchy, and hierarchy improves perceived sophistication. Now, let's introduce a psychological factor, posture. Posture is often ignored in fashion discussions, but it significantly affects perception because clothing interacts with the body, and the body determines how clothing is displayed. Good posture enhances structure, poor posture distorts it. So even the best outfit loses impact without presence, and presence is part of style. Now let's talk about branding perception. A major misconception is that visible logos equal luxury perception. In reality, subtlety often reads as more expensive because subtlety communicates confidence. It suggests the wearer does not rely on external validation signals, and confidence is a strong indicator of perceived value. So understated clothing often appears more refined than loud branding. Now, let's discuss budgeting strategy, because looking expensive on a budget requires smart allocation, not equal spending, but prioritize spending. Invest in foundational pieces, shoes, outerwear, core neutral items, save on trend-driven pieces that change quickly. Because long-term style is built on stability, not novelty. Now, let's talk about maintenance again in a deeper way, because maintenance is where most people lose visual quality. Even well-chosen outfits degrade without care, clothing loses shape over time, colors fade, fabrics wrinkle, but consistent maintenance preserves visual integrity, and preserved integrity maintains perceived value. Now, let's bring everything together. Looking expensive on a budget is not about copying luxury brands. It is about replicating the visual language of luxury. And that language is built on fit, structure, simplicity, coordination, maintenance, and intentional presentation. When these elements align, even inexpensive clothing appears elevated because perception is not based on cost, it is based on coherence. and coherence creates the illusion of quality. So the final realization is this: you are not trying to look rich, you are trying to look intentional, because intention is what the eye reads as value. And when every part of your outfit communicates intention, the overall impression becomes naturally refined, not because of price, but because of execution, and that is the real secret behind looking expensive on a budget. It was never about how much you spend, it was about how clearly your choices communicate control, simplicity, and purpose. And once you understand that, style stops being about money and starts being about perception design.